Before you listen to the Tech Talk Daily podcast, I have to ask, are the high levels of uncertainty you're experiencing keeping you from making bold moves? Are you able to clearly see and act on the game-changing opportunities the pandemic has created? I'm Daniel Burris, serial entrepreneur, global technology futurist, and disruptive innovation expert, and right now, you have a choice to make. You can react to problems and disruptions after they happen, or you can learn to accurately anticipate disruptions before they disrupt and identify and pre-solve problems before they happen, giving you the ability to turn disruptive change into your biggest advantage. If you want to take control of your future and make a significant impact now and in the years ahead, join thousands of leaders from around the world by becoming a member of my Anticipatory Leader System, where you'll get the latest insights, processes, tools, and virtual coaching that will give you the certainty and confidence you need to actively shape a better future for you and your organization. Go to techblogwriter.co.uk and click on Daniel Burris.
Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, I recently wrote an article about how many devices are connected to home routers over at Cyber News. And once again, I urge you to check how many devices you have connected to your home router or router, depending on where you're listening, and competing for bandwidth. Because ideally, I think we need to start thinking about adding those smart speakers, doorbells onto a separate Wi-Fi network. But why? And what are the threats? What do consumers need to know to protect themselves from hackers? And who is responsible for consumer attacks and how they could be prevented? And why is it so important to have a global security standard adoption in the entire IoT industry? These are just a few big topics we're going to be tackling today with Brad Ree from the ioXt Alliance, but I don't want to reveal any more yet. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to San Diego so we can speak with Brad about all things IoT and more. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Brad. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm Brad Ree. I'm the CTO of the ioXt Alliance. We're a group of a little over 300 device manufacturers, ecosystem operators, retailers, network operators, service providers, all working to address the consumer and commercial security concerns around IoT connected devices, with the ultimate goal, of course, of raising the security bar and ultimately, greatly increasing the adoption of connected products.
Well, there's so many reasons I'm excited to get you on here today. And I did recently write an article on some of the subjects we're going to be covering today, because I think if we look back only, 5 years ago, maybe, the average home would have a handful of devices connected to their home network. But now every device that you buy is going to ask for the Wi-Fi password, whether it be even a toaster, washing machine, or refrigerator. And as we're coming up to the holiday season, when people or children are going to be unwrapping their presents, they're not going to be asking you for batteries. Again, they're going to be asking for Wi-Fi passwords. And there seems to be, it's not uncommon to have 20 plus devices connected to the home networks. But just to set the scene, can you tell me a little bit more about the vulnerable devices in the consumer IoT market and possibly provide a few examples of hacks just to wake a few people up listening?
Sure. And but before I jump into that, though, I really would like to sort of comment on the connected devices. So just on a personal level, I forced my family to live through a connected home, because after all, right, if you're going to talk about it, you really need to live it. And, we have these, smart speakers in pretty much every room. There's not a single light in my house that is actually an old fashioned flick on the light. Yeah. Now, what I can tell you is, it is a learning experience, and it doesn't all go well. There's back in the times when we could still travel, I can't tell you the number of times I get home from a trip to find every smart plug unplugged and the wife had plugged in because the cloud service went down. So what I highly recommend, and it is an eye opener, as you say, the over 20 devices in an average home. I can count it up at one point. I have something like over 80 devices. But if you think about those devices, right, they're not just, the standard tablets and phones and computers and smart TVs, but it's, door locks, even these Bluetooth speakers connected through, to your telephone, streaming from, different audio services. And then even, my kids are in their sort of teenage years. So we put these Bluetooth trackers on their keys and wallets, and all of that stuff is connected, spewing out data, across a whole multitude of things. So I highly recommend, any of your listeners just to do a stock of, what really ultimately connects to the internet. And it is a shocking number, and it's only accelerating. So back to your question. So where are all my concerns about these connected devices, right? What we really see is I sort of look at the consumer electronics space as three types of devices. So there's the general purpose with high processing power and rich user interfaces. And these, are computers at the core of it, right? And we've been running antiviruses on computers forever because, these are things that let users install apps and do different things like that. And they have real horsepower to do stuff. But what's interesting is there's a whole class of other devices like these. You got tablets and phones and smart TVs, right? So smart TVs definitely have the ability to download new apps into them and the horsepower to do stuff. The middle class of devices, which are what I see as high processing power with no user interface, these are actually a little bit more concerning. And think about this as like cameras and network video recorders, things that are running Linux, even things that you wouldn't think of, like refrigerators and other white goods. And why this class of devices makes me a little nervous is they have the horsepower to do stuff, and they have no user interface or very limited user interface. So consumers really don't know what's running in them. And then the last class that is a potential ticking time bomb are the highly constrained devices with no user interfaces. So go back to my house with the light bulbs and smart plugs and door locks. So these don't have a lot of horsepower, but there are a lot of them being deployed. So, in aggregate, they can really launch some really interesting, damaging attacks. You've seen there was a IoT worm attack where light bulbs were turned into devices that could update and push malicious code to other light bulbs. So when you think about devices, like I say, that's sort of how I at least categorize and think about the raw risks, but the kind of hacks. So these things, once again, if you look at that middle class of Linux, high power with no user interface, simple attacks like the Mirai botnet attack was basically people, the manufacturers used fixed passwords, admin. They had open debugger telnet ports, and they allowed unsigned images to be put into the device. What is amazing is, several years have gone by. California has even passed and it is in force, State Bill 327. And I got to tell you, recently I went out and bought a handful of wired Ethernet cameras, and half of them are still saying admin. And even to take that one step further, one of them, as I was looking through, had an open telnet port that had no way to disable. So these are some of the kind of things that then people, of course, can load in and install code to go do all kinds of bad things. Sort of a long answer. I hope I touched on where you wanted.
No, absolutely. I mean, without wanting to point the finger of blame, who is responsible for the consumer attacks and how could they be prevented? Because one of the things that I see a lot is when people buy a new smart TV or, I don't know, a smart toaster, they're not thinking, will this smart device be still supported and updated with firmware in 5 years from now? Nobody thinks that, but inevitably that's what's going to happen. It almost feels like there's a big time bomb there. But what do you think, who's responsible for those consumer attacks and how they could be prevented?
You mean in your household, you don't have firmware update Fridays? Right?
Yeah.
So, right now it is a shame. There's there are companies that are still producing products, launching it to the consumer, and leave security all in the consumer's hands, right? And even worse are the ones who are still producing products and then they roll their engineering teams over to the next model year and just orphan that. So those are the what I'll refer to as the bad old days. What we do see though is companies, once again, like our 300 member companies, they are really committed to security, upgradability, and transparency for the consumer. So there is a wave of companies that want consumers to know what they're buying, what they're getting, how it's being supported, and taking and committing to, doing software updates and even telling consumers how long these updates will be around. I think over in the UK, there's a proposed legislation being put out around basically talking about manufacturers should not have fixed passwords. Manufacturers must state how long they're going to support the product. And manufacturers need to have an input path for researchers to submit and tell them that they have issues. So I do see a wave coming, and there's even similar activities happening here in North America. So I think we're starting to move, but yeah, too often it really was up to the consumer to check in, every month. Does my refrigerator need to be upgraded?
And without opening myself up to an attack here, I know I've got a 6-year-old TV where the big name manufacturer has just stopped supplying software updates to that now. It's also a good excuse for me to get a new TV to my wife, but a good way of justifying it. But what do you think consumers need to know to protect themselves from hackers, or how could they better protect themselves from hackers?
So one of the most important things is, look for products that highlight their security, right? So these are back to that transparency thing. And, what I see happening here in the near future is more and more companies are going to bring their security up front, let you know what's going on. There's been talk, of course, of IoT security labels. We in the ioXt Alliance have a compliance stamp with a QR code that lets consumers see. So that's the state that we think is where everything's going to be going. However, what you really want to do is isolate the products that aren't trustworthy or may be obsolete. So most home Wi-Fis now let you have multiple SSIDs. So as I mentioned, I have some teenage kids. A lot of their friends come over. Their friends are always getting on my Wi-Fi, and I put my teenagers and all their friends on the same trusty Wi-Fi as my non-trusty IoT devices. So that is a simple thing. So at least your out-of-date smart TV doesn't have the ability to attack your computer while you're working from home. A couple other key things: just don't reuse passwords. Use a password manager to help manage all of this. A lot of the attacks that we've seen, even the stories about strangers talking to kids through, these baby monitors, these weren't core attacks per se on the device. They were attacks where consumers reused security, two-factor authentication, which I highly recommend, was also not turned on. And basically a hacker was able to steal a password from one site and go attack it on another. So another thing that getting into a little bit more technical, that you really should do is make sure universal plug and play is turned off. So this is a protocol that allows devices to punch holes through your firewall. This has been a key protocol used in many attacks. Even the FBI has come out here in the United States and has recommended to make sure that's turned off. So as I say, you got to dig a little deeper, but if you see UPnP, just disable it. But yeah, so those are some of the core things. And then on a super much more technical, I would absolutely run Nmap. Nmap is an open source project that scans devices to see what ports are open and things like that. And it is actually pretty amazing to see what your home Wi-Fi connected printer is offering up on the network.
Oh, interesting. That's given me something to try later.
Yeah, it is sort of amazing when you take a look at these printers, and even I'll take and extend your question here.
Yeah.
So I happen to be based in San Diego, like the rest of the world, been working from home, right, in these COVID times, and my wife and I actually decided to basically go to another town, rent an Airbnb, and work from a different home, a little change of scenery. But as I walked in this house here, it was a pretty connected house, door locks and all kinds of different thermostats and lighting and everything else. So the first thing I ended up doing, I came in, powered up my computer, scan the network to see what kind of devices are around, if there was even some hidden devices or not, or things like that. I then popped into the router. This Airbnb owner didn't bother to change the password, and God knows how many other people have come through. So did a quick security check to see what was there and everything, and even back to the IoT security problem. They had connected lighting. The lighting happened to be wonderful for vacation, lights turning blue and green and followed the sun. But as once again, we're all working from home doing video conferencing. I needed that bright, white light for my cameras. And at least in this home, they had a fairly name brand lighting system I won't share, but it was also highly hackable from anyone in the home. So I was able to, within literally a handful of minutes, a little Google search, press a couple buttons, and took over the lighting for my home. So I do recommend that if you are staying and using these Airbnb kind of places, just because they look like a house, you really should treat them just like that untrusted Starbucks that we used to all work from.
Love that. And I suppose another thing that's been a problem over the years is how fragmented the IoT landscape is. And there'll be many people listening that will have, a Samsung device, an Apple HomeKit device, Philips lighting system, maybe a Sonos as well, a big pile of bridges on the floor if they've got older devices. And so on that front, I was quite interested to read more about the global security standard adoption in the IoT industry. Is that something that you can expand on today?
Absolutely, Ken. This is there is absolutely a strong push to try to harmonize, try to get to at least a standard that we can all agree to as a minimum. Here at the ioXt Alliance, we really are trying to drive to that, global IoT standard, provide a passport that would go across this. I do see movement, but I do also still see fragmentation in the standard space. And it is sort of an interesting thing because you at least have the views from North America and Europe tend to be a little bit different between the strength of consumer-centric protection versus device manufacturer protection. So there is still some separation in that kind of space. And then even here in North America, I've got this wonderful map that we use for discussing regulations and what's happening in North America. And for anyone who's followed our elections, it's a complete mess here. And guess what? The security regulations are in equal state. You've got states pulling in different directions. And even, California started out with State Bill 327, which set no universal password and reasonable security. But that bill has been picked up and modified by many different states. So, where we're quite concerned is that if that fragmentation doesn't stop, God help the manufacturer who has to ship a light bulb that can pass the Mississippi password requirements, right? We can't continue down that. We do see here in North America, the federal government starting to move a little bit more. Some efforts in NIST have firmed up. And I am sort of hopeful on some longer term work being done in ISO, which is definitely an international standards organization. And I see some harmonization happening there with, once again, how ioXt fits into this. A lot of our members sit in these different work groups. There, we have multiple members on the delegations to the ISO, both from Europe and North America. And what we're really trying to do is lead first with industry, so we don't have to wait for the, all the international standards, but make sure that we're tied back. So ultimately, I think we'll get down to maybe one or two standards, but it is still sort of fragmented.
Wow. And I think for the most part, many users are completely oblivious to the dangers that are hiding in plain sight here. And like we've already mentioned, smart appliances, connected light bulbs or routers or routers, as you might say, can be used as a gateway for hackers to infiltrate home networks and ultimately steal data. But most people that are working from home right now won't necessarily see those security threats. So now everyone is working from home. I'm curious, are businesses that you're talking to aware of these threats, especially around whether protecting corporate data or sensitive corporate data in homes surrounded by all these connected devices with out-of-date firmware? Is that something that you're hearing more about?
It is very, very interesting, right? So in corporate America, we've been hearing for years, before COVID hit, how do we allow the employees to bring your device, bring your own device, right? So it's talk of, if someone brings in a smart home, what portion of the network can they trust, and all these kind of things. And that's been literally, I've been hearing that discussion for 5+ years. All of a sudden, COVID hit and it reversed. Now all of a sudden, it's your work surrounded by your devices. So I do think that there is still great concern. Companies are still struggling with exactly what to do, how to turn on VPNs, make sure that everyone is secure on their computers. But I am greatly concerned about this. And what I don't see coming out is, back to a couple of minutes ago when we talked about these recommendations from the companies around isolating your networks, making sure your computers are running VPNs, things like this just isn't being shared. I'll share with you, my kids, they happen to play a lot of computer games, and when they're not doing school, they're streaming something. So I know when my kids go to bed when I look in my Wi-Fi router, when their traffic is off, they're sleeping. So I have a 1-to-1 correlation. If my kids are awake, they're spewing traffic across my network. One morning, my wife and I were checking to see if my son went to bed on time because he had exams. But as I was spying on my kid, I happened to look and I noticed, wow, my smart plug was sending 2 gigabytes into the cloud over a month period. Now, I got to tell you, what is a smart plug sending to the internet, right? On, off, and how many times do you flick that light switch? So what was that 2 gigabytes? So, these little, and this was just a $10 device that could generate that kind of data. So there is some real danger that these small connected devices could capture traffic, take snapshots of stuff and send them God knows where.
Wow. Did you ever find out what it was uploading, that smart plug? And do you still have it?
So the second part of that is pretty funny. So as I was looking at this, I was literally having coffee with my wife, and we were doing the morning married couple kind of thing, and I'm, hey, look at this smart plug, and right. So this wasn't like a 2-second, oh shoot, this was like a 15-minute, and not only I happen to have 5 of those smart plugs. A guy got a special deal on them, right? Buy 5 for $30 or some crazy thing, and the whole time I'm showing this though, and I'm like, hey, that smart plug. I point out the window. My wife goes, shouldn't you unplug that? No. I want to see a little more. And I show her some more, and she goes, and I'm like, oh, hey, look at the one over there in that corner is doing the same thing. And she's like, shouldn't you unplug that? So, ultimately, yes, I did unplug them, and they're now sitting in a drawer. But by the time I actually was able to get them hooked up and try to sniff the traffic, I wasn't. They were behaving again, and that really is way back at the beginning. These are devices with no user interface. There wasn't even a network activity indicator, right? So you have no idea that this thing's even doing anything. And the end result, by the way, of that is here in the United States, we have some caps on our data usage. Now, they're pretty high, but I have a lot of equipment and my kids. And I had 2 months where I was paying a premium for overage on my internet, and literally I had these 5 plugs generating 2 gigabytes a piece.
Wow,
so yeah, it is interesting what they can do.
So one of the reasons I was excited to get you on here was after reading about your mission at the ioXt Alliance to build confidence in the Internet of Things products. It's not just about problems; you're bringing solutions to the table here. So can you tell me more about that mission?
Sure. So what we did is, we talk about we've been building a IoT security standard that, of course, drives confidence in connected devices through testable security standards and transparency. And why I talk about that testable security standards is we literally, our first batch of devices that we certified ranged from light bulbs to cell phones, dog collars to building controls. I'll tell you, we actually had a fire truck come through, and ultimately it wasn't able to pass because our security is sometimes contrary to ease of use at times, and they have their security levels set so firemen don't have to call for password reset, and I tend to agree with that call there. But what we really have done is focus heavily on how can we raise the bar for consumers? So what core things such as stated security support periods and no universal passwords and things like that, but then build a test framework so manufacturers can certify either through third-party tested labs or through a self-attestation, where we also balance that with researcher rewards to keep everything balanced and honest. And what we really do is, at the end of the day, products that are certified get a security certification label with a QR code so that consumers can see what they're getting. So we really, really feel strongly on visibility on these security ratings. And then we work very closely with different channel partners. One of them is, there's a group, Design Lighting Consortium, that network connected buildings that qualify for energy stimulus now have to be ioXt certified, or we are one of the several security standards that they've added into that.
And what's your pledge, and what kind of brands have signed up? Are there any names that you can share?
Yeah. So our pledge is really around, as I said, it's security, upgradability, and transparency. Specifically, there's 8 core items underneath each one of these about securing your interfaces, and we talk about a couple different strengths of being secured against remote attack, proximity attack, or local attack. But even, just general things like no universal passwords, making sure that your code is signed and updated at a regular basis. So that's at the core, and what you'll see is that maps very well back to the activities coming out of NIST and the activities coming out of the UK and ETSI. The companies that have really signed up, the way that we've driven the pledge to the market is we have a certification program. So that way companies can come in and certify their devices against the pledge. And the reason for that is they can then that way show which devices have which levels of security and everything. So we've currently got I believe it's the initial launch of products. There's I think 10, 12 devices in that first batch. We have quite a few more coming through from the commercial lighting sector. And you should look for some really interesting announcements around certified cell phones for the enterprise sector. The companies that have really driven this, our core board really is made up of, some of our founding board members were Amazon, Google, Facebook, T-Mobile, Comcast, Residio, which is the Honeywell Homes brand, and several others like that. But since that initial time, we're now at about 300 members all working towards this.
Fantastic. And like I said, we have talked about a lot of the problems and we're getting the solutions in place now. But what is your overall grand vision and what makes you hopeful about the future and all those homes filled with probably hundreds of devices as the years go on? But what makes you hopeful about that?
Yeah. So what really makes me hopeful is, there are just, hundreds of thousands of devices being deployed. Even, the Amazon Alexa has 100,000 plus devices that are integrated with it. Why I'm hopeful, though, is though there are many, many different devices being deployed, if you take a look at, we focus a lot on these stakeholders, channel owners, ecosystems, and we see a real desire from these ecosystems to drive security standards into their channel. So where I see sort of an end state is if you get one of those works with badges, you'll have to meet security requirements. I think that there's going to be some form of government regulations in different markets, which will also drive this. And we've also seen some real interest from retailers around driving this for products that go in their shelves as, partially as a way for the brick and mortars to show the strength of why you would buy from your trusted store at your corner versus a potential, online marketplace or something. So that's where, I think that the problem, though there are many manufacturers, there actually is only a relatively handful of channels that reach the consumer. And I see these channels absolutely wanting to drive security through them.
Well, I'm conscious we've covered a lot of ground today. So for anyone listening that would like to find out more information about anything that we've talked about, what's the best way of finding you guys online and equally contacting your team if they've got any questions?
Sure. So we have our website, ioxtalliance.org. We highly encourage anyone who would like to participate, either as a manufacturer, as a retailer, or a channel owner. Our meetings are open to our membership. We actually have no fees for our membership, any of our levels. And I got to tell you, they are absolutely fascinating discussions as you take a look. As I said, listening to the Google and Amazon and Facebook security engineers talk about some of the threats they see and how you can apply them to your own products is definitely makes for fascinating meetings. So I greatly encourage anyone to join that. The other thing that we do is we have monthly member meetings where we try to bring in some guest speakers. Typically, we'll bring in some folks from the public sector. They'll come in and talk about what's happening in their region. And even we've had some interesting discussions around security and privacy from Google as they talked about the COVID trackers that they co-developed with Apple and put in as options for governments to roll out. So lots and lots of opportunities to participate.
Well, I think it's such a timely message that you've delivered today, because there are more and more devices being added to the market daily. We're approaching the holiday season where many people listening are going to be adding more devices to their home network. So just hearing a little bit more about what consumers need to know to better protect themselves from a hack in their own home is priceless. But a big thank you for taking the time to come and share that with me today.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
So a big thank you to Brad for sharing his insights around vulnerable devices in the consumer IoT market and examples of hacks, what consumers need to do to better protect themselves, who is responsible for consumer hacks, how they could have been prevented, not to mention the importance of that global security standard adoption across the IoT industry. But over to you. And at the end of this podcast, I want you all to go home, open up the router or router settings on your device there, and look at how many devices you've got connected to your home Wi-Fi. And when you've got that number, I want you to email me, because I want to create a league table of how many devices you all have connected. And if you were surprised by what you uncovered, because I suspect you will be. So send the number of your devices to me wherever you are in the world to techblogwriter@outlook.com. If social media is more your thing, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram @Neil C. Hughes. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. I'm curious.